Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear friends, I would like to step back from the contemporary affairs and from the daily news that we discuss all the time in terms of the Russian-Ukrainian war in Ukraine, but to step back and look at it from a more historical perspective. And what moved me to do that is that I listened to recently to a program which I actually do regularly, but it was very interesting with Mr. Arestovich. And Arestovich is a Ukrainian politician, and at one point, a couple of years ago, he still was one of Zelensky's key advisors. And in 2019, he was actually one of the presidential candidates in Ukraine. So it's a very versatile and quite well-known person. But what I was intrigued with is his discussion of what Ukraine is and what it should be or could be and what it didn't become. And so that is why today I'd like to call this program, What is Ukraine? That seems to be like a very simple question. But in fact, if you ask different people, they would provide very different answers. And so the simple answer is it depends who you ask. So let me be fair and start with the view of those who are today in the government of Ukraine. And that is Zelensky and his staff and all the people of the ruling clan or ruling party. And these are the nationalists. The nationalists are those who have invented a new identity for Ukraine and who believe, their major beliefs are that it is totally and completely separate from Russia. In fact, what distinguishes this view is what is some people call Ukraine is anti-Russia. And that sums it up quite well because they want to emphasize their differences just about in everything. And that is why they discriminate against the use of Russian language. This is why they persecute the Russian Orthodox Church, which is the Ukrainian church and has been so for 1,000 years, except for westernmost corner of Ukraine, which was for couple of centuries under the Polish rule, and they have what's so-called a Uniate church, which recognizes the Pope, but kept the Orthodox traditions. In other words, this is what distinguishes these people, and that is to be different in everything from Russia. And that also means to reinvent its history. And so their view of Ukrainian history is that it's a history which was persecuted by the Russians, that Ukraine was colonized by Russia, that Russia is everything bad and Ukraine is everything good. It's a victim of the Russian aggression. And that is the identity that is very much close to heart to the contemporary rulers of Germany and France and Britain, because they want somebody anti-Russian. To use them against Russia is a very convenient tool. Now, of course, what I'm trying to argue, and many others, that this is a fake identity. This is not what Ukraine is. This is the identity of a small minority of people who are now the rulers of Ukraine. And that brings me to the thesis of Arestovich, which I will summarize and then provide my own critique of what could be said about this view. Now, Arestovich begins with this very profound notion that today's Ukraine is anti-Russia. And that is what he finds is wrong, because it is simply excluding from the status of correct Ukrainians millions and millions of people who are living in the territory of Ukraine, but who are not Ukrainians. In other words, they don't speak Ukrainian language. They speak Russian language. And they have been speaking this Russian language for centuries. This is their homeland. This is where they have always been, and their forefathers and others. And yet, because of historical moves by Comrade Lenin and Stalin and others, these territories, especially in the east, were joined into a Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine, and they wound up in independent Ukraine when the Soviet Union collapsed. So these are people who are culturally Russian. In terms of a religion, Russian Orthodox, but they are citizens of Ukraine, and they need to be comfortable. They need to be appreciated and not discriminated. This is Arestovich's idea. So his grand plan is what he calls federalization of today's Ukraine, so that it's a union of provinces. It's a union based on federative links between quite autonomous regions that have their own dialects, that they have their priorities in language use and the religion and so forth. So this is what he believes in. And then he says that if you look at all three branches of the Russian nation, these are, which is called Great Russia, Belorussia, and Malorussia or Marorossiya. And let me try to explain the last term, which is what is the official name of Ukraine before 1917. Now, Malorossiya, if you translate it, as sometimes it is done in English, as small Russia, is not exactly correct, and I already explained it. If we look at the old maps of the 19th century, you can see, and I collect maps and I've seen some of those, you can see, for example, Grand Pologne, Petit Pologne, which translates as Great Poland, Small Poland. But it's not really the small that matters, but by the small, by the word small or petit, what is meant is core Poland, Grand Poland. Core Poland means the territories that were originally Polish before anything else, that the people who live there speak Polish, they are Polish, they're Catholic. The same thing was used in the 19th century to the term Kleindeutschland, Großdeutschland. Kleindeutschland was the one that Bismarck united, but it was an alternative to a Großdeutschland or Big Germany, which at that time meant also Austria and some other possessions of Germany, which was not core. So we could say that Petit or Kleindeutschland is core Germany. And big one, Großdeutschland, is including all kinds of possessions in other territories, such as Lithuania or parts of the Baltics with the German population, and in Czechoslovakia, etc. Well, by the same token, the same reasoning is that Malorossiya is not small Russia, it is core Russia. And it makes perfect sense because Russian nation began in Kiev. Kiev was the place where the Prince Volodymyr accepted Christianity in the 9th century from Byzantium. And from that time on, this was the core Russia. And then a couple of centuries later, Prince Vladimir moved to Moscow, and this was remained as one Russian state until 1240. At that time, Russia was occupied by the Mongols, and Russia lost its sovereignty. It ceased to exist as a nation. And it is the western parts of core Russia, Malorossiya, which were occupied by the Polish state that expanded. And this is how the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was in de facto possession of the what was at that time called Russia, Russian Voivodstvo, or Russian province. And this is at that time, in the 15th century, that a term appeared, Ukraine. It is a Polish name for core Russia. That means, if you translate it, lands at the edge. At the edge of what? At the edge of Poland. Another term they used was dikaya pole, which is wild field or open frontier. And this is where the Cossacks used to settle, that were on the edges of Polish state. And this is why they're called Zaporozhye Cossacks. So this is a little bit about history and the meaning of the term. Now, very briefly, in 1648, 58, in this time, Ukraine that time rebelled against Polish rule. It was Orthodox, and they asked the Russian Tsar Alexei to take them under his protection, which is what he did. And from that time forward until 1991, the core Russia, or Ukraine, or Malorossiya, and Great Russia were one. They were one country, one people, one religion. Moreover, during the Russian Revolution, the first commissar of nationalities was Comrade Stalin, and he was very sensitive to nationality issues. And so, under his rule, contrary to what the contemporary Ukrainian historians are inventing, there was a program of Ukrainianization. And not only Lenin attached two provinces of the east, including Kharkov, to Ukraine. He had his own reasons for that. He wanted to have more Russian workers in Ukraine. But under Stalin in the 20s and early 30s, they had a program that was called Ukrainianization, and that was deliberately promoting Ukrainian language and its use all over Ukraine, including provinces that never spoke a word of Ukrainian. Now, one more time. Ukrainian is not really a separate language. It is a beautiful language, if you want to call it that, but it's very, very close to Russian. Pretty much like Bavarian dialect is close to German. If you want to call it the Bavarian language, okay, fine, let's call it Bavarian language. But it is very close to Hochdeutsch, or Standard German. Same thing with Ukrainian. It is a dialect, but out of respect for Ukrainians, let's call it a language. But its very, very core, its grammar, its vocabulary, its origin is the same as Russian. Several centuries ago, it was the same. Now, obviously, languages develop in different directions, so they're similar. They're not identical. Ukrainian is a beautiful language. It has all kinds of diminutive forms that Russian doesn't. And some of its words are clearly understandable for a Russian speaker, but they're different. So these are related languages and ethnically one people. So that's why when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russians had nothing against Ukraine being separate as long as it lived to its constitution proclaimed in 1991, which was open frontiers with Russia, the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation, one pension for all the citizens, open borders for everyone, neutral status for Ukraine, non-aligned status, which was a commitment not to join any alliances, especially those directed against Russia. Under these circumstances, Ukraine and the Russian Federation lived fairly well. And even when the first Orange Revolution happened, sponsored by the West in 2006, Russia still tried very hard to cooperate and made all kinds of discounts on oil and energy use and open frontiers, all kinds of things. But then, because of the crisis of 2008, the Orange Revolution collapsed, and a Russian candidate was elected as president, Mr. Yanukovych. And it is then that the Western powers began to plot a coup d'etat of 2014 to bring the nationalists to power. and they succeeded, and they overthrew Yanukovych. And it is at that time that, and I read the documents, that the Supreme Soviet of Crimea appealed to the Russian Duma to take them under their protection because they didn't want to be ruled by the nationalists, by those who saw their mission in joining NATO, and wrote that into the Ukrainian constitution that Ukraine must be a member of NATO. So they rebelled, and Putin took them under his wing. With was much more difficult situation with Donbass, which also had a referendum in 2015. 14, and they voted to join the Russian Federation, but Putin stalled. And he continued to try to look for a compromise so that they have autonomy, but they remain technically a part of Ukraine. This is what is known under Minsk Accords. Now, and in 2022, the Ukrainians officially declared that Minsk Accords were null and void. They were not going to honor them. And this was the casus belli. This is when Russia recognized the Donbas republics, and they voted one more time to join the Russian Federation, which Putin couldn't afford to neglect anymore. And the rest of the story is history, which we're witnessing unfolding every day now, and the war that is going on. Now, hopefully, the future for Ukraine would be something along the lines of what Arestovich has mapped out, which is a federative state. The Donbass is lost, Crimea is lost, but what remains of Ukraine could be only a country that has friendly and normal neighborly relations with Russia, and obviously any NATO membership, any alliance with the West is excluded. And then we shall see how it will develop in its own term. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon in my regular office. Until next time, write your comments, subscribe to my channel, put likes if you do, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.